Hello, fellow Ag Nerd. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hamrich, and every week, you and I get to hear from the founders, farmers, innovators, and investors, the people shaping the future of the ag industry. Over the past 8 years or so, I've learned a lot from doing this podcast every week, and it's opened up some really cool opportunities. Some of those opportunities have been to help others launch their own shows. In fact, it's become a big part of the consulting work that I do to help commodity groups and companies reach agricultural audiences through digital communications like podcasts. So what you're about to hear is an episode from one of those projects. Earlier this year, I helped Corteva Agriscience launch a new show called Agriscience Explained. Each episode includes voices from at least one scientist and at least one farmer to try to better understand how ag innovations are developed in the R&D process and then where they fit into a modern farm business. I really enjoyed working with Corteva on this. We've already posted, I think, 10 episodes with an 11th coming this week. The topics range from seed to nematodes to cover crops to gene editing to recently reduced statured corn. What you're about to hear is episode 1 of that podcast. If you like it, make sure you find their show and subscribe to it for the other 10 or so episodes that are there now and more to come. So would love your feedback on it as well. Here's that podcast with Corteva Agriscience called Agriscience Explained. Farming is a business, and profit is never guaranteed. To manage risk and give the crop the best possible chance of success, farmers rely on the latest in management practices and some really cutting-edge science. We call it agriscience, this study that brings together biology, chemistry, agronomy, ecology, physics, genetics, data science, and numerous other fields to find the best possible solutions for farmers. It's complex, and it's changing fast. The stakes have never been higher to equip farmers with the best possible tools for a productive, profitable, and sustainable crop. This is Agriscience Explained, From Science to Solutions, a podcast brought to you by Corteva Agriscience. My name is Tim Hamrich, and I get to ride along as we visit with both scientists and farmers about how agricultural innovations are discovered, developed, and deployed on the farm. In today's episode, what can you expect from this new podcast? I mean, there are a lot of other great agricultural shows out there, so why this one? And why now? For these questions, I go straight to the top to visit with Corteva Agriscience Executive Vice President and Chief Technical and Digital Officer Sam Eathington. Sam is a great one to bring onto the show, not only because of his current position, but also his 30-year career in agriscience innovation and a lifetime of being involved with his own family's farm.
Grew up in Western Illinois, Fulton County area, if you know that area. A grain and livestock farm, so we had a lot of crops and a lot of cattle, a lot of hogs when I was a kid. There's 4 brothers, and today 2 of my brothers do all the farming operations still there. And, it's amazing to see how it's evolved. No more hogs. It seemed like when I went to college, the hogs disappeared, but still a lot of cattle and still a lot of grain being produced by my 2 brothers.
And although he remains engaged in the family farm to this day, and at one time even considered returning to the farm full-time, his experiences in college, particularly some internships, led him into the career field of plant breeding.
I thought about coming back home. I'm not sure the farm was big enough at the time, so that was one of the challenges of how much could the farm actually handle. But I got a couple internships, and one was with American Cyanamid and worked on crop protection as an intern, and that was pretty cool. And then I got an internship with one of the seed companies. At the time, it was Asgrow Seed Company, and learned about plant breeding and plant genetics. And I was like, that's pretty darn cool, because that's what's core to everything we're growing on the farm, whether it works or doesn't work. And so I decided to pursue a career in plant genetics with the thought that if I could create some corn hybrids and soybean varieties that help farmers, that'd be a pretty cool thing to do.
So after obtaining his PhD in quantitative genetics and plant breeding at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, he went on to spend the first part of his career in the science of plant breeding day to day. He says this is where he fell in love with the combination of art and science that goes into plant breeding, and that is still a big part of the passion that drives his work today, now leading R&D and digital programs at Corteva Agriscience.
In plant breeding, we always used to talk about the art and science of plant breeding. And, the science has continued to expand. We apply different techniques. We apply new tools. We have things like gene editing now that, gosh, I wish I was 30 years younger. It'd be fun to be a plant breeder with gene editing now. But the art piece of, well, how do you turn the science into a business? How do you turn that science into a solution that, farmers really need and can use, right? Because sometimes we do some science and it's like, well, it's not really solving a problem, or it's more complicated than other solutions that are out there, right? And so I would say as my career evolved, that aspect of how do you turn the science into the business, how do you make sure it really works on the farmer's situation, has become a bigger part. And, I get a lot of enjoyment out of that aspect too. So I still stay in touch with what we're doing, really hardcore science, but a lot more focus on what does it mean to the farmers and how do we deliver it?
And that right there is exactly what this podcast is all about. What it takes to turn science into solutions. Sam has seen what this looks like as a scientist himself, an agribusiness leader, and someone who has been closely connected to a family farm. And that desire to open up the lines of communication that enable science to turn into solutions is one of the big reasons this podcast now exists.
We're working on gene editing. We're working on biologics. We're working on new types of chemistry solutions. It's like we need to talk more about it. We just need to communicate more about it. We need to explain what we're doing more. And so we thought, well, a podcast is one way to reach people. Well, people have a lot of time and listen to stuff. And if something we say, talk about, can help in that conversation, help people understand, maybe get the right people talking a little bit more and think through the situation, then maybe we'll be better off in how technology gets viewed and accepted around the world. And I'll just leave it with, it's an important thing for global society to deal with. If we pull technology away from agriculture and yet still expect to feed a growing population, there's not a lot of choices. At the end of the day, humans have proven they're going to eat, and they will do what's needed to produce the food to eat. And if we decrease productivity of agriculture, then our only option is to bring a lot more land into production. And I would argue that's really not the right direction we want to go for agriculture. I mean, if we want to try to minimize, really the environmental impact we have from producing food, and there is one. There's no way around it. It is reality. And our job is to continue to sort through how do we keep making it a little better, a little better, a little better every year. The worst thing we do is turn around and say, well, let's cut productivity by 25, 30% because we can't use technology, and we bring a whole bunch of more land into production. And so we started the podcast with, if we could have some conversations between scientists and farmers, maybe we'd, help explain a few more things, reach a few more people, maybe spark a few more conversations that help in how we think about technology going forward.
But you may be asking, why now? I mean, agriscience innovation has been around a long time, and podcasts are no longer new. Why is it important now to launch Agriscience Explained? These are worthy questions, and they're going to be the focus of the rest of today's episode. Because, as you may or may not know, there is a lot of new and interesting agricultural innovation coming down the pipeline that all producers, and heck, even consumers, should know more about.
As we look forward at some of the newer technologies coming out, I mentioned gene edited. It's really an advanced sort of plant breeding scheme, right? And the best way one of our scientists described it the other day was, you got a book and you just want to go in the book and you want to change one word. There's lots of words in the books, and it's the same way in corn plant. There's lots of different genes and DNA sequences and base pairs, and We just need to go in and change a few, but they can have a real dramatic impact on how that crop handles a pest or a disease or a stress problem, for example. And it's very precise, and it's much easier than maybe what we could do with plant breeding programs. And so we just thought, with a lot of things going on, there's a lot of new technologies coming out this decade, it'd be important for us to get out there and tell what we're doing, talk about it, and let our scientists explain a little more about how we're using the technology.
And as just one example of these complex topics, certainly one that can be multiple future episodes of this podcast, I asked Sam to dive a little bit deeper into what's going on with modern gene editing technology. This is certainly a hot topic, and as I said, one that we'll do multiple episodes about, but I think Sam provides a great primer.
Yeah, so we have, and we named it this week, we call it our Genlytics ecosystem. And the reason we did that was it's more than just a gene editing tool when we think about this. It really is a fundamental change in what I think plant genetics and even biological genetics are going to look like. First of all, you have to be able to do it. You have to be able to do it at scale. And sometimes we like to say, well, it's easy, and it's not really easy. There's a lot of it is quite complicated. There's a lot of amazing science that scientists are doing in this area around the world, and the amount of science going on is incredible. Not just in plants, but animals and human space for solutions for human diseases. We really see it as, again, this ability to accelerate our plant breeding programs. And so one is what we call our disease super locus. So diseases are a problem in all crops. We know in North America corn, it's common to deal with gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, southern rust, common rust, anthracnose. I mean, you name it. These are big problems. Some parts of the country, farmers have to spray every year. You now have things like tar spot that's come in, new pests. Sometimes you got to spray 2 or 3 times for that one, or you're in trouble. Yet, in a lot of cases, plants have some genetic tolerance. It's not always enough, and it's a lot of times spread out in very diverse germplasm. And it takes a lot of work as a plant breeder to bring all this together and align it, get it in elite germplasm that yields the way you want. It has to have the right maturity. It's got to have the right standability, grain quality, you name it. Right? There's a lot of things you have to get right to put a product out there. And all of a sudden you're working on 6, 10, 12, 15 other genes for disease tolerance that you're trying to bring in from diverse germplasm. And, a lot of times you bring along stuff you don't want, and you're trying to sort that out too. And so it really slows down progress that you can make. And so one of the simple things gene editing did was it let us go into, for example, one of the genes that we're using, and all the genes we're using are all in maize already. So there's no foreign DNA. It's not a GMO, right? These are all genes that are already in corn. It was just very easy to go in there and basically cut the gene out and put it into your elite germplasm in the US. And so when we did that, we said, well, let's put them all in the same spot. So it was really simple and easy to work with. Instead of think about simple probability. If it's, let's say it's 1 out of 4 is sort of the simple math for a single gene. And you raise that to the power of 10. So you got to deal with 10 genes. Really, really small probability you got to get them all. But if you raise 1 and 4 to the power of 1, it's a pretty good probability you got to get those, right? And so we just said, well, let's put them all in the same spot. And that's why we call it a super locus, and did that. And what we're seeing is that it works. I mean, they perform the way they're supposed to. They give resistance. They segregate right. They didn't change anything else. Nothing else came along. And so it makes it really simple and easy for our plant breeders to select for that one gene, improve disease tolerance for a whole bunch of diseases at once. And then they can keep working on all the other traits. How much more yield can they get, standability and maturity and grain quality, and et cetera, et cetera. And so what's cool about it, as we kind of figured it out, we got the process working, we're just working on more and more diseases. We have a whole pipeline of diseases lined up. I think, the number of genes we got in testing is quite large, so we can bring durability to it, right? So as a farmer is getting a disease problem, now we could have 2 or 3 different resistance genes in that crop. And so that one, as you think about a plant breeder and you get to say, well, gosh, if I could change the DNA around the way that makes it easy for me to work with it, that's a really powerful thing. I didn't change the DNA. I just kind of changed the locations. I just moved the pieces around a little bit. So, the plant breeders for the next 20 or 30 years, they're going to look back at us and say, gosh, they didn't know anything. They didn't know how to do stuff. I'm surprised they did anything, made progress. It's going to be really neat to see what happens.
And this is just one example of how this Genalytics ecosystem can change the game in plant breeding. There's so much happening in gene editing. Stay tuned to the podcast for more examples on future episodes. But gene editing is just one of the many fields of agriscience we plan to explore on this show. Just as a starting point here, Sam outlined 6 growth platforms in an innovation showcase presentation back in November that include some of the key areas we're going to be exploring here on this podcast. Not only gene editing, but 5 other areas as well, such as biologicals, targeting $1 billion in annual revenues by the end of the decade at Corteva, and another one being hybrid wheat.
The biologic space, tremendous opportunity. And a lot of these are very natural type products, but, people can be afraid of them. I mean, a biological, boy, that sounds dangerous. Just had another recall I see on some organic carrots, right? Because of contamination from an organism. And so helping people understand, well, things are very different and the applications, how we use them is not the same as maybe an E. coli or some sort of contamination you might hear about on the news. And then as we looked at other things, like we just talked about our hybrid wheat program. And you wouldn't think hybridizing a crop would be viewed as concerning. I mean, hybrid corn, right? It was done in the 20s. We used to get about 25 bushels an acre. Today, we're over 180. I think this year we might land 183, 184 in the U.S., right? That was because we hybridized the crop and applied technology to it, plant breeding to it. We're able to do that now with wheat. Yet, some people might be concerned about it.
And a lot of times with technology, we fear that which we don't really understand. If you're listening and you're intrigued by what's going on with hybrid wheat especially, you're not alone. Corteva announced a one-of-its-kind proprietary system with potential to deliver yield advantages of 10% and up to 20% in water-stressed environments. And Sam hopes that this is just the beginning with their new solution to the age-old sterility system problem.
Yeah, hybrid wheat, this concept's been around a long time. Depending on who you talk to, 30 years or 40 years. Been a lot of attempts at doing it, a few successes, but pretty limited. And the challenge has always been not that hybrids didn't work. It's clear cut. You hybridize the crop, 10, 20% yield improvements, yield stability. It's there, just like we saw in the early days with corn. And with a hybrid structure, our plant breeders can really go to work to make them even better. The challenge has always been, the crop itself doesn't really lend it very easily to, having, pollen controlled, right? Corn, female, male, reproductive parts are separate. It's pretty easy to go out. Early years, we just detasseled corn, and that's how you made sure that a certain male plant pollinated the female plant. We can't do that in wheat. And so the sterility system, how do you make a wheat plant male sterile, has been a challenge. And there's been a lot of attempts using cytoplasmic male sterility systems, using chemical sterility systems, and they just weren't very stable. They weren't very consistent. You couldn't apply them across a lot of germplasm, couldn't really sometimes run them at a lot of scale. And so you'd be trying to produce a hybrid and the sterility system would fail and you get a bunch of just self, so you get a bunch of varietal. And so you don't get the heterosis. At Pioneer and then into Corteva, there was a lot of research on really basic reproductive genes and how things worked. And from that, scientists figured out a lot of things around how you could make wheat sterile. As the wheat genome got completed and got sequenced, so we got it sequenced, and wheat's a very big genome, so it took a little more time to early on to get that one done. They found the genes they needed to using some classic genetic tricks and techniques. They're able to create the sterility system. They're able to put basically a linking marker on it that we can use to sort. And we've started working on some of the male characteristics and was figuring out the sorting system and everything. But and it all came together. And it's like, look, we can make these things sterile. We can get seed set from pollen from other plants. We can sort it out, and we see the hybrid performance. And so pretty excited about that. We've been testing it quite a while, but we're now on track for a 2027 launch. And I think it's really a beginning of a real shift in hybrid wheat. I mean, we're back in the 1920s of corn right now, and probably better than that because we know a lot more science and a lot of other stuff. But the next couple decades in wheat is going to be quite exciting.
And if you're following along at home, the rest of those 6 growth platforms after gene editing, crop protection, biologicals, and hybrid wheat include seed and trait out-licensing, and last but certainly not least, biofuels, to help meet rising fuel demand from the long-haul transportation sector with low-carbon alternatives. This last one about biofuels is exciting because Sam says it's opening up new revenue opportunities for farmers to meet demand for more sustainable fuels without sacrificing food acres.
This really came about as first initially a lot of renewable oils and kind of a drop-in, plant-based oils dropped right in. You can create renewable oils was growing. And we had started a program back in 2018. I think some of our first field trials, maybe early 2019, where we were bringing our hybrid canola from Europe and planting it as a winter crop, say in the Mid-South and South in the United States. So they go into Tennessee, Kentucky, and that area. And there was a little experience in that area planting some rapeseed in the history. And of course, there's winter wheat being planted. And we thought, we thought our products coming out of Europe would actually fit there. And if it worked, that could produce another crop of a lot of high oil that could go into this market. And so we started testing that. And sure enough, we planted them in the fall. They grew. They survived the winter. They produced oil, and then farmers were able to harvest them and still plant their summer crop. And so you could do like a winter canola and then come back with soybeans. And so all of a sudden you're getting 2 oil crops off that same acre. And as we worked through it, we got a partnership initially set up with Bunge and then Chevron, where Bunge basically contracts, takes the winter canola seed, does the crushing, and then Chevron takes the oil. And so last year, we had 5,000 acre pilot production of farmers. It was very successful. Yields are very good. 100% of the farmers came back. So I always look at that and say, that meant they made more money. They were happy with the system. It worked for them. And I think this year we're on over 35,000 acres already went back in the ground in that system. And we think it can grow substantially. And the nice thing about it is, it really isn't a food versus fuel debate. It is a incremental to the system, which gives us choices and options, which is the right thing to do. And so we said, well, look, we've got a lot of Gencia, we've got a lot of winter canola, we've got sunflower. These are all crops that produce a lot of oil and can fit nicely into the European sustainable aviation fuel. And so we announced earlier this week that we will be setting up a collaboration with BP, where they will again take that crop and take that oil for the SAF market. So I think it's going to be a really neat opportunity for farmers to look at having other crops that can generate revenue on the farm, be complementary to other systems, not be a food versus fuel debate. If we are replacing a little bit of wheat, that's a nice thing about our hybrid wheat. We're going to see a pretty substantial wheat increase in productivity. So if a few acres move out of wheat into biofuels, yeah, I think it's a win-win in what we're doing. So yeah, that one's going to be a good one to watch, and I think really fits nicely into the fuel market long term.
And all of this, from gene editing to biologicals and from hybrid wheat to crop protection to biofuels, are just a small sampling of the topics we're going to explore more deeply on this podcast. Others, just to name a few off the top of my head, are going to include reduced stature corn, artificial intelligence, and formulation science. Thanks to Corteva Agriscience, we're going to get access to the world's leading scientists and subject matter experts on these topics, as well as the farmers and agronomists that are turning this science into solutions every day. And that brings up an important point about this podcast that I should mention right here, which is rather than just posting presentations or raw one-on-one interviews with the scientists, we're approaching this podcast from a slightly different angle, one in which we can really tell the story of what's happening on the farm and provide context to more deeply understand a lot of these complex scientific principles. We want to understand them at both a scientific level and at a practical level. The whole idea is that you, whether you're listening as a farmer, agronomist, advisor, or just curious consumer, will leave each episode knowing a little bit more about agriscience and how it impacts your life or your livelihood or both. And I don't want to give too much away about these future episodes, but just as a teaser here of what is yet to come, episode 4 profiles a California grape grower, Michael Lageluso, and some of his current struggles with a major pest over there, the root knot nematode.
Root knot nematodes, one of our big enemies, and we've seen some rather large counts in sampling we've done. Some of the young vineyards that we had planted were growing very strong, and we started just to visually notice a little decline. Through some sampling, we saw some absolutely astronomical numbers occurring and watched them over a period of 3 years really start to move up. And so that's when we made a decision there's something we need to start doing to combat this problem.
Michael's story in that episode details how devastating this pest can be, how he's lost his number one tool for control due to regulation, and how he's looking for answers that will manage the pest but not hinder his soil health building efforts. Alongside Michael on that episode is Corteva Agriscience nematologist Dr. Tim Thoden, who talks about some of the fascinating science behind nematodes and the research going into more effective management tools. Michael is currently trialing one of those new tools, Reclamel, which will be sold under the brand name Celebro. Here's Dr. Tim Thoden.
It has made its way through 10 years or more of a development process around the world with, I think we are having nowadays 4,500 trials. And I think what makes it unique is, I would assume it's the best described nematicide scientifically that is out there, because we have spent a lot of internal and external efforts in doing a lot of additional, what we would call like characterization studies of the chemistry, just to show like what are the attributes and want to understand what are our nematicides or what is our Reclamel doing to the soil. So not just looking at, okay, what does it do to the pest? What does it do to the parasitic nematode? And that's for sure. That's the first goal. But then really kind of diving deeply into the question, what does it do to beneficial nematodes? What does it do to beneficial soil fungi? What does it do to beneficial soil bacteria? That's where we have spent a lot of time also for that molecule, and where I always say nowadays, luckily have seen that it is a unique and extremely gentle, let's call it, material that really nicely fits into a strategy of integrated, let's say, nematode management, taking into account that, yes, also your soil and biologicals are important in that strategy.
I wanted to share those clips with you from episode 4 with Michael and Tim as just one example of the format that you can expect from episodes of this podcast. Each one diving deep into the science while connecting it to what's actually happening on the farm and the problems and challenges farmers and agronomists are actually facing day to day. And the number and diversity of those stories that are out there, I think, will surprise you. The show is a chance to deepen our knowledge of the science while better understanding how it's applied in the field on a commercial farm. And that, in my opinion, is what makes this show special.
let's have conversations with scientists and farmers, right? So scientists who might be creating something and a farmer who's trying to use it. And I think that's going to bring a really unique perspective, and I think create some unique conversation about the technology. Obviously, we'd like to use this as a way to get more knowledge about the science we're doing out to farmers around the world, agronomists, salespeople. But I also hope it ultimately bleeds into, the full agriculture chain and people who are not in agriculture, people who are just eating food. I mean, hopefully there's some topics here that they can listen to and say, wow, I didn't know that's what gene editing was. I didn't know that's how they were using it. It's actually a very good thing. It's not a scary thing. It's a good thing. And so, I think first we'll talk with farmers and agronomists, but hopefully we go beyond that and hit people that are in society in general, and becomes a way for people to learn a little bit more. And kind of back to what we talked about, I think the more open and transparent we have and the more conversations we have, I think people come to the similar conclusions about how this technology is really the right thing for us to do in agriculture and feeding the population.
And before we wrap up, one more note about what you can expect from this podcast, and that is some takeaways at the end of each episode. So for today's takeaways, I'd like to highlight one, the fact that there is some incredible cutting-edge science and technology that is going into farming and the tools farmers have access to, and we're going to do our very best to tell those stories from both the scientist and the farmer perspective on this show. 2, gene editing is here and it's changing the game. After all of the incredible advancements we've seen over the years thanks to genetics, and if you don't believe me, stay tuned to our next episode, it's wild to think that we might still just be scratching the surface of what's genetically possible in crop production, and these tools might help us get there. And 3, innovations can help not only make farmers more productive, but also more profitable, and I think Sam's biofuels example highlights this point well. So with that, a very special thank you to Sam Eathington and the team at Corteva Agriscience for launching this podcast. I could not be more excited to share these stories and interviews we have lined up for this series. And to each and every one of you listening, thank you so much. Please make sure you follow or subscribe to the show on whatever podcast app you like to use, and tell a few friends about it, because we have a lot more agri-science topics to explore and explain. This podcast is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience and hosted by me, Tim Hamrich. Huge thank you to our producers, Clint Pilcher and Ray DeCrawl, as well as Ann Leonard, who makes it all happen behind the scenes. Jamie Hamrich edits these podcasts, and the music was composed by Dmitry Volkov. That's going to do it for this week. Subscribe to the podcast for more Agriscience Explained, from science to solutions. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening all the way through to the end of that. If you like that, find Agriscience Explained on your favorite podcast app or player. Thank you to Corteva Agriscience for letting me work on this with you. And I think you're going to like some of the topics that are still to come on this show. Some really, really cool stuff. And it's great to hear from both leading scientists and leading farmers about how all this is playing out. Thanks so much for listening. I do not take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.